I hope you had a good conversation during our roundtables. So I would like to welcome you to our final session of this incredible conference that has brought together so many people from so many different countries. Our last session is focused on innovation. As we all know, technologies can help a lot in the conservation of species. So this can help us to improve monitoring or improve how we address the threats that these species have. So the colleagues, the presentations that we have today will show us different ideas, different new methods that have been implemented in the last years to help culture. I would just like to let you know that there was a small change in the program, and the session will start with a presentation by José Tavares, which was meant to be done yesterday, but will be done today, and then the agenda will carry on as it was planned. Please don't forget to ask your questions, write your questions in the Q&A box, and let's start.
Yes, we can. Hello, everybody. My name is José Tavares. I am the director of the Vulture Conservation Foundation. And what I will give you next is a very brief overview of the current status of vultures in Europe, including a very positive history of vulture recovery and restoration. Why is it important to keep an eye on population estimates and trends of vultures? Well, it is the only way to find out if we are really halting population declines and reversing recent negative population trends. And these are indeed the two ultimate main objectives of our work, vulture conservation work, of the Multi-Species Action Plan to conserve African Eurasian vultures, which indeed was a document to which my foundation, the Vulture Conservation Foundation, has contributed extensively. Therefore, the VCF sets itself to publish every 2 years or so an update on the most current and available population estimates and trends for all European vulture species. Formerly 4 species, now we have a 5th European vulture species, the Rupel's vulture. The latest update was produced by the VCF earlier this year in the summer of 2022 and published. It covers, as I mentioned, the 5 European vulture species. I will here only concentrate on 4. I will leave Rupel's vultures aside. And I would like to say that this compilation effort covers not only Europe, but also the North African countries and the Middle East. What is then the most up-to-date picture of vultures in Europe? And if we start with the Griffon vulture, Europe's most common vulture species, we see that the species continues to increase, particularly in Western Europe. Very strong population increases in Portugal, in Spain, where over the last decade, there continues to be a population increase of about 18 to 26%, even though the growth rate there is declining comparing to precedent decades. And again, a very strong increase in France, where, for example, in the French Pyrenees, only in 7 years, the population has increased by 51%. This positive trend is also happening in the Balkans, where there the variations from country to country are a little bit more striking. Strongest increases have been registered in Bulgaria and in Serbia, although in 1 or 2 countries the populations are still declining, and here North Macedonia bucks the trend and the species is declining severely in that country. Good surprise from North Africa, where the species started to breed in 2021 after more than 30 years of absence in Morocco, while the Turkish population is still seemingly declining. If we move to the Cinereous vulture, we see again very strong increases in Western Europe. In Portugal and in France, populations there have been going up with about 15 additional breeding pairs since in the last 3 to 4 years. In Spain, the population continues to grow, in some areas spectacularly. So, for example, in the colonies, some colonies in Extremadura, in Sierra de San Pedro, and in Monfragüe National Park have increased in the last 4 or 5 years by 51% or about 24% in the other case. The colony in Dadia in northeastern Greece seems to be stable, while from Bulgaria there are very good news because the reintroduction project there has been very successful and has already established a population, a breeding population with a minimum of 6 breeding pairs and successful breeding in the last 2 years. In Turkey, again, the overall population trend seems to be declining. If we move to the birded vulture, this again, trends are very positive. The species is increasingly in Europe as generally, and there are now 465 breeding pairs across Europe, more than double what there was about 30 years ago. The reintroduced population in the Alps continues to increase very fast. There were, in 2021, at least 62 breeding pairs, which fledged a record number of fledglings. There's new breeding pairs every year in the Swiss Alps, in the Austrian Alps, and also in the Italian and the French Alps. In Spain, again, the situation is very good. In the Pyrenees, the population is stable or even still slightly increasing, but mainly new breeding territories have been recorded in areas where the species has been reintroduced. So there are now 5 new pairs in Andalusia, 2 new breeding pairs in Asturias, 1 in La Rioja. In Crete, the population seemed to have increased as well in the last few years from 7 to 10 pairs. Only in Corsica, Morocco, and Turkey, the situation is not so good. The situation is critical in Corsica. There's only 2 breeding pairs left on the island, with 2 breeding pairs lost since the last update. In Morocco, the population seems to be very small, between 5 and 10 pairs, while in Turkey, although data is very poor, the species is still probably declining. Regarding Egyptian vulture, this is the only species that is not increasing in Europe. The largest European population for this species in Spain seems to be stable or eventually with a very slight increase at national scale. The small Italian population have registered recently some gains, but in France, for example, the species is again declining after long-term population stability, and in the Balkans is overall stable, as we've heard yesterday in several talks. So, as a general overview, very positive population trends for griffon, cinereous, and birded vulture, with usually medium to large population increases, particularly in Western Europe, but also starting in the Balkan countries, for example, the impressive recovery of the griffon vulture in Bulgaria. These 3 species currently have got a very favorable conservation status and outlook in core areas of Western Europe. The Egyptian vulture is the one that remains vulnerable in Europe. Although the steep declines that we observed throughout the 20th century seem to have been halted, most Egyptian vulture populations at the most have stabilized and very few are increasing. However, there is room for hope, and I hope that this conference will lead to further conservation efforts that will eventually result in an increase of the Egyptian vulture too. These positive results in Europe are linked mostly to intensive and targeted conservation efforts, including reintroduction projects that have really helped restore these core vulture populations. The only less rosy picture within Europe and the Mediterranean is North Africa and Turkey, where the status of vulture populations there remain particularly worrying and are generally declining. So 4 vulture species in the continent which generally offer a very, very good positive outcome, conservation status and conservation outlook. It is a case of being optimist. We can be optimist about their future, and this is really important in an era and age where the biodiversity crisis usually suggests terrible declines across the globe and across different taxa. Yes, we can. Let's go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dimitar Gradinarov, and in this presentation, I will talk for the use of drones for conservation in Bulgaria. In conservation, you can use the drones for a lot of things, but currently, at the moment, we are using them for photography and video about any project activities because we are doing short videos and clips for our projects. They are very good for monitoring of nesting colonies, bird counts, and many other similar things. Law enforcement, it's very usable sometimes to use drone, especially for prevention in some places in Bulgaria, for example, the red-breasted geese wintering grounds near Shabo and Durankuak. We have very positive experience regarding the prevention of poaching and also for collecting evidences for various offenses. Mapping, we are currently discussing the possibilities of using drones for mapping, and we have some limited experience with that, but in the future, for sure, we will use this. At the moment, we are preparing a small system for mounting flight diverters on electric pylons. In some cases, they can be used for other things as well. For rescue operation of feeding Egyptian vultures in remote nests and many other things. You can see in this artificial sacred falcon nest box eggs of common kestrel. Specifically, this kind of monitoring is almost impossible without a drone. This is very remote and difficult to access nest of imperial eagle. This is another nest of imperial eagle later in the season. In remote areas, sometimes it is extremely convenient to use the drone for monitoring of remote nests. This is an example of black stork nest, and here there is a pretty big cliff at a greater distance where you can send the drone and observe it from a very close distance. And of course, infrared. Infrared can be very useful, especially during the spring when the temperatures are not very high and you can see definitely the contrast of the chicks in the nests. In some cases, even with 50 times spotting scope, it is not enough. And you can send the drone and check from a very close distance. This is a martin in a nest. Monitoring of protected areas, PODA. Monitoring of the colonies of the spoonbills, which are completely inaccessible by any other way. They're invisible by the ground because there is not a suitable vantage point from where you can observe the colony, so the drone is the only option. And here you can see our very light and unpretentious divertor system, which we are developing for the use with very light and small drones. You can see Mavic 2 Pro in this case, successfully mounting a diverter on electric pylon. With DJI drones, there is a geo zone map, zones with different levels of restrictions. When flying over prohibited objects, you will need a special permission. Here is a good example. This is airport of Burgas. You can see different zones, restricted zones, altitude zones, authorization zones. Here you can see the zones, you can check them online. Probably the most crucial part is the management of the batteries. Use only original batteries and chargers and even cables, because you have a lot of potential problems if you're not doing that. But sure that you have the optimal transition range by adjusting the antennas, especially when you're flying at very long distances. Radio mode 2. This is the standard mode of most radios, and I strongly suggest that you stick with this mode. This is the most useful mode for drones. What's important about an aviation system is that there are 3 types of modes. GPS mode, which is the standard one, and it is very important to fly in GPS mode. Optical mode and attitude mode. Optical mode use only the vision system. In attitude mode, the drone keeps a specific altitude but not position, and it can be pretty twitchy to operate, so be very careful. You can take off manually or using the application. Most of the time you fly in P mode or positioning mode, which is the standard mode, which is the most practical one. Sometimes you need to enter into sport mode, and some drones have a tripod mode, which is very suitable for tight spaces or very slow movements. You can use intelligent flight modes, but for most of the serious work, you will need to be in manual mode. Another important issue, dangers for birds. There is a lot of cases already, some of them pretty severe. Drones are quite noisy machines, and if you're not careful and not knowing what you're doing, disturbance can be a pretty big problem for a lot of birds. Sometimes there are injuries, sometimes there are serious injuries, and even death. Anything can be a pretty big problem, but especially with wires and tree branches, because many times the optical avoidance systems is not recognizing them. You have to be careful in difficult weather. Sometimes the weather can change very fast. You have to be pretty careful with poachers and hunters because sometimes they can shoot your drone down. Be careful above water surfaces with reflections because sometimes they can trick the visual system of the drone. Problems with bird strikes or attacks. When you're doing monitoring of eagles, buzzards, falcons, and hawks, you have to be very careful, especially during the breeding season and especially near their territory and nests. Some of these birds can be pretty aggressive towards drones, and you can lose your drone and you can injure the bird in the process. Attack avoidance strategies with birds. If you're attacked from behind or from the side or from below, you have some chances to get away by climbing very fast in sport mode. Attacks from above are the most dangerous. You have almost no chance to escape. The most important practice in this situation is not to fly alone, but to have experienced spotter with you, which is observing the drone and space around the drone at all times. And there are some tips from some very experienced guys. Knowing when to climb is all about timing. Territories of Egyptian vultures along the flyway. Previous and current territories of Egyptian vultures. Counting the sheep from above. In the past, Egyptian vultures used to breed close to this territory in Ponor Mountain. And in the end, don't let the fear of falling keep you from flying. Thank you for your attention.
Hello everyone, I'm Emil Yordanov and I'm a PhD student in Plovdiv University. Also, I'm involved in the Egyptian Vulture New Life project as a field assistant. Today I will talk about alternative methods for monitoring of the Egyptian vulture nests. In the past 3 years, by means of trail camera, we successfully observed 4 nests in the eastern Rhodopes, which is about 80% of the population of the Egyptian vulture in Bulgaria. Also, we have been following a couple in northern Bulgaria since 2012 by online camera inside the nest. By means of trail camera, the phenology of the species can be established very precisely. In our case, we established the average arrival date of the adults is the 3rd of April. The average date of the starting incubation and laying first egg is the 18th of April, and the laying of the second egg is the 24th of April. The average hatching date of the first chick is the 31st of May, and in the second chick is the 4th of June. About the breeding performance, for the last 3 years, the productivity of the pairs is 1.3, the breeding success is 1.4, and the hatchling rate is 1.8. We were able to calculate quite precisely the average duration of incubation, which is 41.6 days. Out of the 26 eggs laid, 22 were hatched and only 20 of the chicks survived until fledgling. For the whole period we have 4 eggs, was in 3 different years. In the year 2090, 2 eggs in 2 different nests had a known fate. In these 2 nests, the memory of the SD card was already full before the hatching, and we didn't know what exactly happened with the eggs or the hatchlings. In year 2020, one of the eggs didn't hatch on the expected date and remained in the nest for 84 days. Most probably it was not fertilized since the male appeared just 2 days prior to its laying. The fourth case is from 2021. The male appears 1 month after the female lays an egg. A few hours after laying, the female breaks the egg. The probable reason is that the egg was not fertilized. For the past 3 years, we identified 2 cases of chick losses in 2 different nests in the year 2020. The loss of youngs in one case was due to poisoning. The adults bring a poisonous bite in the nest and feed it to the chick. An hour and a half after feeding, the chick dies. A few days later, the female returns to the nest and feeds on the chick's body, leaves the nest and never returns back. 6 days after that, the female was found dead. The next year, the male came back with another female. In the second case, the younger chick died 8 days after the hatching. The reason is unknown, but we speculate about a health problem. From the photos, it was visible that the younger chick looks smaller than the regular body size of the hatchlings and looks frail. The younger chick doesn't look very active in the photos that we have. It was down most of the time. There are only few photos with it head upright. The parents try to feed it normally, but the chicks eat very rarely. Regarding the change of the partners of the 3-year period, we have 2 cases. In 2021, a change of the partner was found in 2 different nests. One of the nests is the one with the poisoned chick and poisoned female bird in 2020. The following year, the male returns with a new female. In the other case, the reason for change are not clear. The male start to breed with a different female. Thank you for your attention, and if you have some questions, you can ask me later in our round table.
The program for Egyptian vultures was established in 2012, so it's the youngest of all European vulture breeding programs. Prague Zoo has been breeding Egyptian vultures since 1993 and has raised more than 30 young over the past 20 years, which is why it was entrusted with the management of the breeding program. The current vulture population in captivity is almost 200 individuals, but although we have increased the productivity of young and have at least one new breeding pair every year, we still do not have enough young. We still have a good number of founders, but mostly from the Western population, from the Spain and France. We have also some population in captivity from Balkan, the Eastern population, but we have just dozens birds in our population. We also have some injured and rescued wild birds, which are included in captive breeding and they are very important for the releasing programs. We increased the number of offspring in last 10-12 years. If we compare it 10-12 years ago, we had 5 to 6 birds every year. Now we have 20 to 30, it depends on breeding season. We have 2 subspecies in European captivity, but we are focused on the nominate one, on Percnopterus percnopterus, because the second one, the eastern subspecies Ginginianus, it's not very well represented, and we have only 2 bloodlines. Also, the nominate subspecies, it's more important for us due to reintroductions in the southern Europe. The cooperation with the local authorities, it's very important for us. There is one example of confiscation in Belgium. 7 birds were confiscated there, so we send them. We went there to check them, to make some veterinary examinations, and then after we recommended the transfer to France, to Austria, and to Italy. Also, we cooperate with the AZA, so it's the American Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And also we received one bird from Dallas Zoo, from United States, because there is a very small population of European vultures. So we decided during the meeting that it will be better to include these birds to captive breeding, and unfortunately this bird laid the egg. It's more than 30 years old, but laid the egg the first time in our breeding center. Adoption is very important for in captive breeding, because the Egyptian vultures, it's only one vulture which is able to raise more than one chick on the nest. So we have sometimes two siblings, sometimes we have 2, 3, and they are unrelated. We transfer also the birds from unexperienced pairs or some new pairs which are not successful with the rising of chick yet. So we are move them sometimes 1,000 kilometers to be fostered in the nest of a proven pair. The transfer of wild-caught, confiscated, or injured vultures from the countries of origin to breeding and dating aviaries in Prague Zoo is very important for the EP also, and we received birds from the breeding and rescue station Stara Zagora, and also from rescue breeding station from Guadalentin from Spain, and this year from Lebanon and from Syria. There's example of the aviary on the left. There is a dating aviary for injured birds, which some of them are flightless. Also, if they are pair up there, we move them to the breeding facility. They can breed there, because if they are together, they disturb each other, so they have to be separated. There's some example of some movement across the Europe, from Spain to Prague for examination, and when they made a pair, we send them to France to breeding facility. Also a lot of transfers between Prague and Stara Zagora breeding and rescue station. So and there's an example of aviary in Austria. The pair from confiscation breed there well already. Example of the bird we received this year. The first one came from Lebanon in January, and this was with the broken leg, with the implantates in the leg, and they have 13 bullets in the body. So 6 bullets we removed already. The other ones it's difficult to get out because they are in the bones or something like that. But what is important also, the level value, it's 13.73, so it's very, very high, because if you compare it with the level value of captive edge birds, which is about 1.8, so it's different. So we are a little bit afraid about the fertility of the bird in the future. So there is an example how we got the implantates out from the leg, because there was something like degradation and breakdown of bones. It's much better. So the implants were removed. She walks well now. Her legs are in current position. If you have a look on the left, the left leg, it was in normal position. Also, there was some risk of bumblefoot or another leg. So he made a bandage like that. But on the picture on the right, you can see it was the leg with the implantates, and it's now in the right position. So it's going very well. And another example of Kalamun, it was the female. She arrived this year from Syria, and there is no bullets in the body, but there is some subluxation and arthrosis in the left wing. Another 2 birds came from Lebanon in September, but also one of them with 9 bullets in the body. So now we are trying to take the bullets out from the body, and also there are some healed fractures of both forearms, as you can see on the picture. Another example of the male came this year from the Lebanon. So we do hematology, blood biochemistry, and so on. So to be sure that the birds will be good. And some couple of words about the action plan. In the last, what we did, So we provided as an EP 26 captive bred Egyptian vulture for releasing project in Bulgaria. In the past, in 2015, we also provide some birds to a releasing project in Italy. We also make 12 new birds and we move them to 9 European countries. So we are increasing a little bit. Also, we also received 2 releasable wild-caught birds from the breeding station from Stara Zagora. And for this year and next year, we are planning to import another 2 birds, confiscated birds from Lebanon, and 1 from the Niger, also from Africa. And for the future, for the next months and next year, we need to increase the number of offspring and captive edge birds and use them for the releasing in Bulgaria, in future in Andalusia, and in Italy, and so in southern Europe, because this is one of the main goal of the EP, to provide a lot of birds, to keep the healthy captive population and provide birds for the releasing project. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ivaylo Klisurov and I'm a coordinator from the Green Balkans team in the New Life Egyptian Vulture project. I'm here to make a presentation about the video surveillance systems, which is really a great tool for nature conservation, and especially in this new life we're using it quite often in many activities which are really important, and I hope that it will be interesting for you. We are using normally a standard IP cameras with quite high resolution, between 2 and 8 megapixels cameras, and we are using also standard NVRs, network video recorders, which are making these records. Depends on the movement, depends on the system, of course. In the most remote areas, the systems are making records remotely in our networks, which the electricity supply is more normal. In the most cases, the power supply really is a challenge. In 90% of the systems we are using, we are working with a solar powered supply, and it is really a challenge. It's so difficult to organize such a process, because most of the rocks, for example, are with curves, and it's very difficult to do that. Nowadays, in the last few years, we get a new type of batteries which replace the existing gel batteries, and now this technology, lithium technology, is much more powerful and effective in for such a system, so it makes our life really more easy, and the things become more professional. Something which is everywhere in the world the same. Such systems are really difficult to be placed, because it is very extremely remote areas. So normally we're using alpinists and speleologists to do that. Most of our team are such people. So sometimes, here, never do that in home, because it's dangerous, especially this guy here. You don't know, you can see really the high here, but it's quite high and dangerous. As I said, the most areas are really remote, high in the mountains, with low temperatures and so on. So it's really it's sometimes a disaster to do that. So this especially area is in the Central Balkan National Park area. We are using the cameras in these supplementary feeding stations, which is really, again, another great tool for vulture protection and conservation. So here I will just shortly show you how such a systems are starting to be established, and then this is the results. This is the supplementary feeding station in East Rhodops in Potocnic area near Studenko Arenets, and here is the results. Of course, the video survival systems, they are really designed for security. So we can also use these systems as a security, and they really can help us to do that. As I say, it's really powerful tool. So here I just shortly would like to show you some results about after all of these efforts. And without that cameras and without this access and without this remote control, such a picture, such a knowledge, such a experience, unfortunately, will be absolutely impossible. So it's really a great tool. And yes, thank you for your attention. I hope to see you.
Hi everyone, my name is Anastasios Bounas and I am a researcher at the University of Ioannina. I have also been collaborating for many years with BirdLife Greece on the Egyptian Vulture Life projects. So today I'm going to present to you a recent analysis we did regarding the genetics of the Egyptian vulture population, mainly in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And of course, how can these results aid the plant conservation actions for the species? First of all, why use genetics? The genetics are a very important tool for conservationists. The application of genetics to conservation has played an important role in conservation biology in the last few years, and more articles are focused on conservation biology and incorporate genetics in them. So conservation genetics then, the application of genetic theory and genetic techniques to reduce the risk of extinction in threatened species. It can be an extremely broad field, and it mainly includes genetic management of small populations, management and the reintroduction of captive populations, the restoration of biological communities. It can also include the resolution of taxonomic uncertainties, the detection and prediction of the effects of hybridization, understanding the relationship between adaptation or fitness and the genetic characteristics of individuals and populations, and others. For the case of the Egyptian vulture, we will talk mainly about the first thematic, the genetic management of small populations. So let's see what happens with the Egyptian vulture then. Of course, you are probably familiar with the Egyptian vulture population in the Balkans. Its numbers severely declined after the 80s by a rate of about 4 to 8% per year. And we are now left with a small, mostly fragmented population, with the core being in the Eastern Rhodops. Thanks to lots of efforts, we can see a more stabilizing trend in the last few years, but still we are very far from securing the population. In fact, it does not look good at all if you check the species probability of extinction. But what about the genetic diversity levels? Through a major effort of many individuals, mainly during the implementation of the previous life project, we collected several samples from Egyptian vultures in the Eastern Mediterranean region, from Greece, from Bulgaria and Turkey. We additionally collected historical samples from museum specimens. These correspond to 1987 until now, 2021, for the contemporary samples, and from 1844 to 1974 for the historical samples. Our main aim was to assess the genetic diversity and structure of the populations in comparison with the historical patterns, so we can find out whether the observed patterns are the result of recent decline and fragmentation. identify, let's say, some genetic signatures of population change. What we did was to extract DNA. I will not get in any methodological details. Of course, you can message me. You can question me if you need to know the details on the lab work, but I will keep it short here. So DNA extraction, then we amplified 12 microsatellite loci in a total of 93 samples, 62 contemporary ones and 31 historic. We used the genotype to calculate and compare genetic diversity levels between past and present populations. You can see here some of the standard diversity metrics. I would like to focus your attention on two of them that account for the differences in sample size between the two groups, and that is allelic richness and unbiased heterozygosity. Allelic richness here and unbiased heterozygosity here. We can actually see for these two metrics that genetic diversity has decreased in the current population as a whole. It was greater in the historical population. Rated by examining the allele frequencies in the contemporary and the historic populations. So, although we do not have any significant loss in heterozygosity, we see that most of the rare alleles in the historic population are now gone. They are lost or they are found in a lower frequency. That is that they are even rarer now. This is a textbook genetic drift. Remember that we talked about in the introduction. It can result in the loss of rare alleles and can decrease the size of the gene pool. However, what genetic drift can also do is through such changes to cause new population to be genetically distinct from its original one. So we had to check the genetic structure then. Two clustering analysis, a PCA and a hierarchical Bayesian method implemented in structure software. So both methods did not show any significant structure, neither among the population locations nor between the temporal groups. And this is rather good as it shows that despite the loss of alleles, despite the work of the genetic drift, we have not reached a new population with a totally altered gene pool, let's say. Life Project has published two very important documents in the last few years, a feasibility study assessing the reinforcement of the Egyptian vulture in the Balkans, and a reinforcement strategy for the Egyptian vulture. Both determined that the implementation of a captive breeding program could significantly reduce the population risk of extinction. And moreover, a population viability analysis of the Balkan populations showed that releasing 9 birds per year for the next 20 years, along with some conservation management actions to increase the species survival, it would be an appropriate strategy to stabilize the population. Strategy, but two main questions remain unresolved. Is this number, the 9 birds per year, sufficient to prevent genetic diversity loss? And second, where should the birds originate from? We collected more samples, this time from across much of the species range, in order to evaluate the effects of the currently proposed population management scheme on retaining the allelic diversity. We followed the previous approach. We extracted DNA, we genotyped the individuals at the same 12 loci, but this time we also amplified 4 genes that are supposed to be involved in migration because we wanted to get any signal of local adaptation of the species subpopulations. Some simulations of genetic diversity under population reinforcement scenarios. We see that reinforcing the population with 9 individuals per year for 20 years would result in retaining almost 85% of alleles, of rare alleles at the frequency of 0.05. But without management at all, the Balkan Egyptian vulture population showed 35% probability of retaining the low frequency alleles. This is a very fast loss considering the current population size. It seems, though, that the planned population reinforcement with 9 birds per year for 20 years will provide enough demographic support, allowing the population to retain much of the rare allelic diversity. Out that there is not much of genetic structure when examining both the neutral and the adaptive loci, except of course of the expected one that all populations differ from the Canary Island one, the subspecies population, pretty much common sense. However, we did find one allele that shows a clinal frequency, that is its frequency increases as we move to the west, and it reaches its highest frequency in the Iberian Peninsula. This is very interesting because that allele is totally absent from the Canary Island population that does not migrate. So that finding gives us information that local adaptations could exist across the species range. So a source population for the reinforcement should be chosen based on ecological or behavioral similarity. Other than that, the source population just has to be diverse enough. In the genetic variability of the Balkan population after reinforcement using different candidate source populations, we did not see any significant patterns, neither in the number of effective alleles nor in the expected heterozygosity. So overall, our findings provide the Egyptian vulture reinforcement program with much flexibility, with enough flexibility regarding the selection of individuals to be released. Birds, of course, that originate from the Balkans would ensure ecological and behavioral similarity and would be the most sensible choice for the reinforcement. But nevertheless, our study indicates that releasing individuals of different ancestry, mainly from Turkey, for example, or Iberia, could also be feasible. Remember that the most important concern at this point is to increase population size so that genetic drift is reduced and stop any diversity loss that could lead to serious problems in the future of the species. Thus, we can ensure the persistence of the Balkan Egyptian vultures. Thanks to all of you, and many thanks to our colleagues for helping us collect the samples needed for this study.
Okay, so many thanks to the speakers for all these great presentations. I think they gave us lots of ideas of things that we could also apply in our own areas or regions where we work for the species. We're gonna have a short Q&A session. So I'm gonna ask our speakers to join in with us. Okay, hi everybody. Some of our speakers are unfortunately not here, but we'll quickly go through. Yeah, if everybody can turn their cameras on, please. So I have some questions for Emil, specifically.
Yes.
Have you tried to use tracking data to classify nest outcomes and validate that with the nest camera data? So have you used? Yeah.
From the observed nest with trail camera, we don't have tagged adult birds. Usually the tracking data, we use it to follow the birds when they come from migration or when they occupy their territory, and of course to follow to find a new place for feeding. For other data from the trail camera, we use it especially for the breeding success, for the hatchling rate, and so on.
Okay, thanks. Could you give us an idea of how long it takes you to analyze all the data that you have from the cameras?
Pretty long. The pictures are, I think the pictures from the last 3 years are more than 300,000 of pictures, and months, many months.
Okay, so with one person, or so it's only you doing this work?
Yes, it's only me, and it's a really, really long period of checking pictures. And after that, this is only when I check the pictures and collect the data from the pictures. And after that comes, of course, the analysis, which is also a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you, Emil.
You're welcome.
I think Mitko is not here, so I'm not sure if Volen or Emil, can you answer the questions that are addressed for Mitko, or not really?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So we have been asked, have you used the drones at all for nest surveys? And what kind of interactions have you noted with raptors and drones? And do you have protocols to manage and mitigate these interactions?
Yes, also Ivo from Green Balkans is here. He's also a big fan of drones and using them intensively.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nest monitoring as well, so he can also add something. But yeah, generally we used drones to monitor and to check some of the Egyptian Egyptian vulture nests. So far, we have not observed any negative interactions. Of course, there should be, people should be cautious, especially during the incubation period, in order not to disturb the bird and cause some breeding failure, which is very unwanted. But yeah, generally birds stay calm and are not disturbed too much by the drones. But of course, Ivo can mention, and Emo is also flying a drone, so they can add something.
Yes, usually when we check the Egyptian vulture nest with drones, it's safe a lot of times because sometimes we have to spend a really long time with the scope just to see how many youngs they have, how many hatchlings. And with drones, it's safe, really, really safe time because especially if the quality of the camera is good, and if you have zoom with the drone, you can go not so close to the cliff with the nest, and you have to zoom and to see very clearly, in many cases very clearly, not always, how many hatchlings have inside.
Ivo is also using a drone with a thermal camera, so
Yes.
another approach from a distance to distinguish warm individuals inside the niche, inside the nest.
Okay, so you haven't seen any disturbance in the nest while doing this in the nest? Because this is another question.
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
No, it's about the Egyptian vulture.
Especially when we have now a new drones with a high zoom camera, so now we can really not disturb the birds from a long distance. We can observe Falcon X from 70 meters.
Wow.
So it's really the birds really doesn't even react that the drone is somewhere near them because it's a high distance. The drone is like a small insect.
So really useful method then.
Yeah, because the drones are really going dramatically develop the system, and you can have a drone with a high zoom camera, and it's quite expensive, but still it's very acceptable as a price and quality. So it's a powerful tool. Yeah.
Okay, thanks guys. We're gonna carry on with some questions for Anton. Hi Anton. So one question is, how restricted is contact between captive hatched chicks and humans?
Some of the breeding pairs are in the aviaries in the exhibit, so they can see the visitors of the zoo also. But most of the nests are in the backside of the aviaries, and if we use the chick for the raising, so they are collected from the nest, and we move them. To the for the hacking site, for example, and if we use them for the delay releasing, we separate them immediately. It's mean 2-3 weeks after the fledging, and move them to the aviaries behind the scenes.
Okay, great. And then we had another question, sorry, that maybe you can answer together with Volen. The question is, considering the threats to the survival that the species has along the flyway, so what would be the optimal level of reintroductions that are required? So this maybe can be answered by Volen. And depending on the number that is required, the question is, would this be feasible to have all these birds that need to be released in captive breeding?
Regarding the first part of the question, according to the model that was developed, we need to release 6 birds per year for a period of 30 years, or 9 birds per year for a period of 20 years, but also achieve an increase in the survival of the wild individuals with 4% in order to reverse the population trend and to have a good increase of the population. So these are the numbers. So far we cannot achieve that numbers, but hopefully in future that will be possible with the increase of the captive breeding pool. Anton can add something.
You want to add something, Roberto?
No, I think
sorry, Anton.
I think it was comprehensive from the Volen. Yeah. The main goal is to increase the number to provide more birds.
Okay, many thanks. And I think we've gone through all the questions that we had. So I would like to really thank you all for being here and for answering the questions that we had. And now we're going to continue to the closing event of the conference. So I will give the stage to Umberto, who will be presenting the Nick Williams Award, and will reveal who is the winner of this award. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Hope so. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Umberto Gallorsi. I'm the head of the coordinating unit of the Raptor MOU. I'm talking from Abu Dhabi. The Egyptian Vulture Conference 2022 has decided to honor the work of Nick Williams by establishing an award on his name. Nick and raptors had a lifelong relationship and love. Nick grew up in the countryside in southwest England, where he developed a fascination for birds and raptors in particular. While still at high school, he started working for RSPB and later on with other conservation organizations to do conservation work and research on raptors, and in particular on falcons, and publish many scientific papers for work in the UK and abroad. And Nick was not a person easy to forget. I met him in 2013 when I worked for a bit for him, and we went together watching hobbies in the Po River, and in a few hours we located more than 10 nests. And recently, talking about him with a colleague, Emirati, he compared Nick with a falcon. And considering that the falcon is the national emblem of the Emirates, you can understand what kind of level of respect Nick has gained while working here in Abu Dhabi and elsewhere. Nick had, as I said, also a very important role in conservation and raptor conservation in particular. He was involved in the development of the Raptor MOU since 2005, when DEFRA, the UK Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, developed and produced the UK Raptor Study, a document which analyzed the value of having an international agreement under the CMS looking at the conservation of migratory raptor. And that document saw the involvement of Nick, because Nick was in the steering committee of DEFRA, who cleared and approved this document. But also he was involved in the development of the document that was developed soon afterwards, which was the recommendation 812 by CMS, which was approved in November 2005, which basically gave the mandate to develop the Raptor MOU. And Nick was again involved in the first negotiation meeting, which took place in Scotland in 2007, and was part of the UK delegation. As a result of all this work, in 2008, the Raptor MOU eventually came into force, and 3 years later, Nick had his dreams became reality when he was appointed as the head of coordinating unit and moved here to Abu Dhabi. And under his leadership, the Raptor MOU grew to almost 60 signatories, developed and established the technical advisory group, which is the team that supports technically the implementation of the MOU, organized 2 meetings of the signatories in 2012 and 2015, and developed 2 very important documents for the conservation. One is the Sacred Falcon Global Action Plan, which was a very complicated politically and technically document, and the Vulture Multi-Species Action Plan, of which the Flyaway Action Plan for the Egyptian vulture is a part. So Nick was also a very committed conservationist per se, not only on the policies part, but even on the ground. A very good photographer, a man of great integrity. And he inspired and motivated with his dedication, with expertise, his professionalism, his enthusiasm and sense of humor, the work of everybody. And Nick left a hole and a lack in the heart of everybody who knew him. And his work still is there, guiding us for the conservation of his and our beloved birds, the raptors. And I'm very glad to say that a very respected conservationist and friend of Nick and me, Andre Bota, has also sent us a video talking about Nick on a more personal scale. And I would like you to send out this video, please.
Good day, and thank you for the opportunity that you afforded me to pay tribute to a friend and colleague, Nick Williams, who sadly passed away and is no longer with us. I met Nick the first time in 2014 at the first meeting of the Technical Advisory Group of the Raptors MOU in Edinburgh in Scotland. And we spent some time together, obviously in boardrooms a lot, but also some time in the field. And, you know, that first meeting in Scotland in icy cold conditions in January, in rain and sleet, etc. Nick was really in his element. But likewise, he was the same in 40-degree plus heat in West Africa and in other parts where we spent time together, in particular in the UAE, of course, with the drafting of the Multi-Species Action Plan. So we've worked relatively closely together initially, and a lot more with the drafting of the Multi-Species Action Plan for vultures since 2016, but also in the run-up to that during Moss in Trondheim in Norway the year before, and then all the way through the process, the approximately 18 months of the drafting of the plan, the various regional workshops that both him and I attended, and then engaging with a wide range of stakeholders. And it was really a fulfilling and an exciting experience, I think, for all of us. But Nick was really very much a driving force behind the process, a very sharp, keen eye when it comes to the drafting of plans, when it comes to editing, dealing with language. Many of us that were part of the team are second language English speakers, and he was able to sort of guide us through some of the pitfalls, working very closely, of course, with Jenny at the time. And it was really a productive experience for all of us. But apart from the formal work process, also in downtime, there were opportunities to socialize somewhat. And there are a couple of experiences that I do very vividly remember. The first being going out at Monfragua during the European regional workshop for the drafting of the MSAP to play a game of soccer, and Nick pitching up in a pair of what looked to me like military boots and running around trying to sort of get the ball and dominate the ball as he was wont to do. And I think many others, me not being a keen footballer anyway, sort of stepping back fairly readily when Nick was approaching, taking possession of the ball. But that's just very typical of his nature, is that he was tenacious, and once he set his eye on a goal, he was sure to work towards reaching it. Other experiences, again, related to outside of the working situation, is the street cricket game we played early one morning in Mumbai with a bunch of colleagues, but also with some of the youngsters in that sort of just joined us spontaneously in the street, and him really enjoying that side of things. And then obviously also numerous trips into the field, looking at raptors, but in particular sort of sharing some of his and getting insights into his passion and his love for falcons in particular. It really was a privilege to work with Nick from many perspectives, and I think many of us are missing him and will miss him into the future. But I think the work that he's done during his tenure at the Raptors MOU is there for all to see, and in particular, the multi-species action plan is a tribute to the massive contribution that he's made to raptors and vulture conservation in particular, within the flyway and in the area of focus that we both work in. So from my side, again, I was privileged to have been able to spend the time with him, and I'd like to also again extend my condolences to his family, his friends, and his colleagues, and we all surely miss him very much. Thank you.
The Nick Williams Award is established to honor Nick's contribution to vulture conservation that is inspiring all of us. A panel composed by a selected group of the organizing committee of the conference has assessed all accepted abstracts coming from low and middle income countries. And the criteria against which they were considered included being a well-written and structured abstract, the work covering well-defined gap in vulture research or conservation, clearly stated objective, well-designed and replicable methodology, and conservation inference resulting from the work. So the work could have direct or potential important conservation results. And I'm pleased here to announce that the winner of the 2022 Nick Williams Award is Dr. Stella Egbe from Nigeria. Dr. Stella Egbe is a senior conservation manager of the species program of the Nigeria Conservation Foundation. The work she has summarized yesterday in her presentation regarding the vulture conservation in Nigeria is a great example of a multidisciplinary conservation work, well planned and executed. And the approach of the implementation should be repeated and expanded and can guide the development of the work we are currently done on West Africa vulture conservation strategy. And a workshop has been held a few weeks ago that is currently being. So thank you very much, Stella. And first of all, congratulations.
Much, Umberto. Thank you. So I will just quickly say that this award is, I'm humbled to accept this award on behalf of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation and my colleagues who have been on ground to lead on this. Solomon Adefolu was instrumental in implementation of this project. Under the guidance and leadership of Joseph Onoja, who was heading the technical programs and is now the Director General of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. So I accept this award warmly, and I believe that it's going to spur us to continue to do more within Nigeria and within the region of West Africa. Thank you very much to those that selected, to the selectors of the awardees. And to everyone who made a submission, I am glad that we're all making a mark in different areas of the world to protect and conserve vultures. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. It's now also my time to say thank you for a lot of people who made this incredible conference possible. We have more than 300 registered participants coming from 54 countries, something that would have been impossible if we had had probably a physical conference. Extremely expensive and really complicated in terms of carbon impact and the time that people would have had to spend traveling, and the money we could have had to spend to travel and not devote to actual conservation ground. So the conference in 2 days has covered status threats, conservation work, awareness raising, innovation, and so on. But this has been happening. Thank you for the hard work of BSPB, in particular Stoyan Nikolov and Jenny Weston, and there will be many others that needs to be thanked. But in particular, I want to thank the background of this, which is the RSPB event team, who has been working despite the very tough sort that they're going through, and in delivering a very great job in allowing all us to use this AirCast studio for delivering conservation. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure and honor for me to close this conference, and hope to see you online again or in person soon in many other occasions, talking about our beloved vultures. Thanks.